Hey everybody, I want to talk about food and feelings today. So if you consider yourself to be a stress eater or somebody who is often found saying, I'm too upset to eat, I'm too stressed to eat, today's video is for you. In a world where we are constantly glorifying and vilifying food, meaning we label foods as good or bad, and somehow people become good and bad for eating them, eating becomes really complicated. The good news is food is just food and a calorie is just a calorie. Your worth as a human being has absolutely nothing to do with what you put in your mouth. But what you put in your mouth can influence how you feel. I don't know how many of you have ever read the book, It's Not Your Fault, Overcoming Anorexia and Bulimia Through Biopsychiatry by Dr. Russell Marks, but it is full of great information. The book is a little bit older. It was written, it was copyrighted in 91 and published in 92, so it is an older book. But some of the information in there is really fantastic. And while part of today might feel like a science lesson to you, most of you know that I feel pretty strongly that knowledge is power. The more you know, the better decisions you can make for yourself. Well, one of the things that Dr. Marks talks about in his book is the role of endorphins and also neurotransmitters in eating and eating disorders or eating problems. And for those of you who may not be familiar, endorphins are your body's natural painkillers, endo meaning they're produced inside your body as opposed to an exorphin, like a opioid type peptide that's produced by gluten, for example, that you would introduce as an external source into your body. And they play a pretty big role in regulating appetite. They can affect memory, they relieve pain, they can even affect your blood pressure. And one of the things that we know is that food deprivation, also known as food restriction, and stress can actually increase endorphins. So if you're somebody who tends to be really stressed out, or you're somebody who is often restricting your food intake, you are increasing endorphins in your body. Now, why is that important? Well, in a study that Dr. Marks talks about in his book that was done actually on rats, and before you say, but Monica, I'm not a rat, this doesn't apply to me, I will tell you it was replicated in humans, so in fact it does apply to you. What they found was that when endorphins were increased in the rats, they would actually bypass carbohydrates and go towards increasing their fat intake. Now when they introduced an opiate blocker, they would actually stop eating and it would decrease their appetite. So the thought is that opiate blockers, also known as antagonists, will actually decrease appetite and sort of increase satiety or feelings of fullness. Now, what's really interesting is that eating sugar will stimulate appetite and will actually increase a craving for sweets, which in turn further increases endorphins, which will then produce more relaxation and some stress relief, or actually relieving stress in the process. Now, if you are stopping to think about it and you think, that sounds like a cycle that could be a little bit vicious, you are absolutely correct. Because what happens is people feel stressed out. Their endorphins increase. They crave sugar. They eat sugar. The sugar increases their appetite. It increases the endorphins, creating more cravings for sweets. So they eat more sweets. And yes, at the same time, they are getting a relaxation effect. But the problem with this is that the cycle doesn't actually end. And so some people then will find themselves eating a level of sweets that they're not comfortable with, and they will skip their next meal or start restricting their appetite in order to control their weight. Now, the problem with that is that skipping the next meal does not actually eliminate your appetite. It's only deferring it to later. And it's going to build and build and build until you can't stave it off anymore. And very often people will end up binging, which then gets into its own cycle of restricting and eating too much. So I ate too much, oh my God, I can't eat again. I need to restrict my appetite, which again is going to increase your endorphins, right? We just talked about that before, which will increase the cravings for sweets, and it gets you into a really difficult cycle. Now, I'm going to pause on the endorphins for a moment, and I'm going to switch over to the whole concept of the fact that carbohydrates also will increase serotonin levels in your body. Now, many of you already know that serotonin is linked to regulating our mood, in particular depression. So drugs like Prozac and Zoloft, for example, are key in making more serotonin available to alleviate symptoms of depression. Now, what's really interesting is that there are a subgroup of people that tend to be carbohydrate cravers, meaning that's all they really want to eat. Sometimes people will actually just refer to it as, I just need a lot of comfort food. And they're looking for breads and potatoes and cookies and things like that. Now, people who are eating in order to fend off tension, mental fatigue, or anxiety are kind of in a self-prescribed regimen of antidepressant therapy, believe it or not. The carbohydrate cravers, however, will eat far beyond satisfaction many times. And then they get back into the cycle that I was just talking about, where there's this craving. You eat more than you're comfortable with, which then leads to this concept of, well, if I just restrict my food intake so that I can control my weight, then I'll be okay. But as you're restricting your food intake, you're increasing endorphins, which is increasing sugar cravings, which you see exactly where I'm going with that. I also think it's important that we talk about the whole concept of not eating in response to stress and not eating in response to feelings, because I know there are those of you out there saying, but Monica, I don't feel like this applies to me. I'm not somebody that craves a lot of sweets. I don't overeat. I just don't eat. If you're engaged in that type of behavior or those types of responses, you already know that restricting is numbing out your feelings. Now let's think about it. When your body gets into a really deprived state and you are essentially starving yourself, having feelings and emotions is not essential to your survival. What's essential to your survival is that your heart keeps beating, your lungs keep breathing air, your brain keeps functioning to run the rest of your vital organs. That's what's vital to your survival. And when you are engaged in restricting, you're also engaged in a whole bunch of mental gymnastics, which is, how can I get out of eating? How can I get out of eating and not make other people feel uncomfortable? How can I make other people think that I'm okay and that I'm eating? All of that is keeping your brain really busy so that you are still not fully experiencing the effects of stress or whatever the uncomfortable feelings are. So now let's talk about the whole concept of uncomfortable feelings. Because uncomfortable feelings are just that. They are uncomfortable. They are not going to kill you. I promise you, you are not going to die in relation to your emotions, although sometimes people will convince themselves that they will. If you're somebody who's running around saying, I can't stand feeling this way, I can't stand feeling this way, what you're doing is sending a message to your brain that says, you really can't stand feeling that way. But you can stand feeling that way. It's just uncomfortable. All feelings shift, change, and pass with time. And emotions are really important because they tell us what's important to us in our lives. And when they're uncomfortable enough, they also propel us into action that will resolve whatever the situation is that's creating those feelings in the first place. So, if you remember having a really important test in school, and maybe you were somebody that engaged in some stress eating at the time. For example, maybe you ate a bunch of popcorn or a bunch of cookies or whatever it was. How much of that actually improved your test score? Or maybe you were somebody that starved yourself in response to that stress. How much of that actually improved your test score? In fact, studying is what improves your test score. That is the action that the uncomfortable feeling was looking for you to take. Now, if you have an uncomfortable situation in a relationship with a friend or a parent and you're really angry, not eating doesn't solve that. And it certainly doesn't do anything to the other person to get back at them. It doesn't affect them at all if you don't eat dinner. It affects you. What's going to affect that situation and effectively resolve that situation is you using your voice and letting people know how you feel and what you need, what you liked or didn't like, what you need to be different, and begin to use your voice to negotiate solutions around that. If you're somebody who is feeling really sad about just an event that you have no control over, Not eating doesn't make that event go away. You can eat even though you're sad. You can eat even though you're having feelings. Eat anyway. Nourishing yourself is going to give you enough energy to figure out what you need to do to soothe yourself through those feelings. And essentially, it is incredibly empowering. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where you're saying, I'm too upset to eat, this day is too stressful, it's really important that you understand that that is just an excuse for not taking care of yourself. And I know it stinks to hear that, but it's the truth. And I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you that. You are able to eat even though you're uncomfortable. Physiologically, you can still put food in your mouth, chew, and swallow. It's a fact. And your body's still going to know how to digest that food. And what's really important is that when you do that anyway, you really truly will have the energy to resolve all kinds of situations in your life. And even though it's uncomfortable, it is so important and vital in your recovery. Because really, recovery is where it all happens. It's where you are able to create a life worth living that you love and that you can thrive in. And that's what I want to see you do. And I can't wait to see you do it. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions or you have any thoughts, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Shoot me an email or a message, and I will definitely respond. Have a great rest of your day.